No one survives the Northlands. You're walking to your death." The words hit Lyra like ice water, but she had heard them before. Every person she had begged for help, every face that had turned away from her in the past 3 days, had said the same thing. The monster of the North killed anyone who crossed into his territory. The cursed lands beyond the boundary stones were a graveyard for the foolish and the desperate. Lyra supposed she was both. She pulled her threadbare cloak tighter around her shoulders and kept walking. Behind her, the lights of Millbrook Pack territory grew smaller and smaller until they disappeared entirely. Ahead of her, the forest loomed dark and forbidding, the trees growing larger and more twisted as the path wound northward into the mountains. She would rather die free than live as a slave to Alpha Garrett's son. The accusation still burned in her chest like poison. Theft. They had called her a thief, standing there in the great hall with their false evidence and their smug certainty. The Alpha's daughter Vivian had planted the stolen jewellery in Lyra's belongings while she slept, then raised the alarm the next morning. A servant girl's word against the Alpha's bloodline. There had never been any doubt about the outcome. "You'll marry my son as payment for your crimes," Alpha Garrett had declared. "Consider yourself fortunate that we're offering you a chance to redeem your worthless bloodline." Worthless. The word had followed her all her life, whispered behind her back by pack members who saw her as nothing more than an orphaned burden. She had no family name, no bloodline to claim, no wolf strong enough to earn respect. Just Lyra, just nobody. But she would not be nobody's unwilling wife. The boundary stones appeared before her like ancient sentinels, taller than a man and carved with warnings in the old language. Even wolves who couldn't read the symbols understood their meaning. Beyond this point lay death. Beyond this point ruled the monster of the North, the Alpha King who had claimed these cursed lands as his own and killed anyone foolish enough to challenge him. The stories said he was enormous even in human form, standing head and shoulders above other alphas. They said his wolf was something ancient and unnatural, larger than any living shifter had a right to be. They said he had been exiled from civilized lands decades ago for crimes too terrible to speak aloud. They said he hunted trespassers for sport. They said a lot of things about the monster of the North, but none of the stories mentioned whether he was better or worse than a forced marriage to a cruel Alpha's son. Lyra stepped between the boundary stones. The change was immediate and unnatural. The temperature dropped so quickly that her breath began to fog, and the shadows beneath the trees deepened until they seemed solid and alive. The very air felt heavy with ancient magic, pressing against her skin like a warning. Every instinct she possessed screamed at her to turn back, to run, to choose any fate over this one. Her wolf went silent. That frightened her more than the cold or the shadows or the stories of monsters. Her wolf had always been weak, barely strong enough to shift, but she had never gone completely quiet. Now there was nothing but empty space where that small, familiar presence should have been, as if something in this place had frightened her wolf into hiding. Lyra forced herself to keep walking. The path beneath her feet was well worn despite the warnings, marked with tracks that made her stomach clench with unease. Most were the paw prints of ordinary wolves, probably the remains of those who had tried to challenge the territory's ruler. But scattered among them were prints so large they couldn't possibly belong to any wolf she had ever seen. She knelt beside one, spreading her fingers across the impression in the dirt. The paw print was twice the size of her entire hand, with claw marks gouged so deep into the earth that they looked like knife wounds. Whatever had made this track was massive beyond reason, a creature of nightmares and ancient bloodlines, the monster of the North, and she was walking directly into his domain. Lyra stood and continued deeper into the cursed territory. The trees grew taller and more twisted as she climbed, their branches forming a canopy so thick that barely any moonlight filtered through. Strange sounds echoed in the darkness around her, the crack of breaking wood, the distant howl of something that sounded almost like a wolf, but not quite right. The whisper of wind through leaves that carried words in languages she didn't recognize. Every step took her further from any hope of rescue or retreat. Every step carried her deeper into a place where death was the only certainty. But death had been waiting for her in Millbrook too, just wearing the mask of marriage and false respectability. At least here she would face it on her own terms. The path curved around a massive boulder, and suddenly the forest opened into a small clearing. Moonlight spilled down like silver water, illuminating patches of snow that shouldn't exist this early in the season. The cold bit at her exposed skin with supernatural intensity, and her breath came in sharp puffs that dissipated too quickly in the thin air. That was when she saw the eyes. They watched her from the tree line, golden and burning like twin suns in the darkness. Not human eyes, not the eyes of any ordinary wolf. These were ancient and intelligent, and filled with a predator's patient hunger. They belonged to something that had been apex before the first humans ever looked up at the stars and wondered what lay beyond their small, safe world. Lyra's heart hammered against her ribs, but she stood perfectly still. Running would only trigger the chase instinct. Fighting was impossible against something that left paw prints the size of dinner plates. All she could do was meet that terrible gaze and wait to see whether she would die quickly or slowly. The creature stepped into the clearing. It was enormous, larger than any wolf had a right to be, standing as tall at the shoulder as a horse. Its fur was silver-black like polished steel, and its frame carried the power of something built for war rather than the hunt. This was a dire wolf, the stuff of legends and ancient bloodlines, a creature that belonged to an age when the world was younger and more savage. This was the monster of the north in his true form. But when their eyes met across the moonlit clearing, something impossible happened. The world stopped. Time crystallized around that single moment of recognition, and Lyra felt something deep in her chest snap into place, like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known existed. The massive wolf froze mid-step, his golden eyes going wide with what looked like shock. A low whine escaped his throat, so quiet she almost missed it, the sound of something powerful and ancient suddenly made vulnerable. And then he began to shift. The transformation was unlike anything Lyra had ever witnessed. Most wolves shifted quickly, their bodies flowing from one form to another in a handful of heartbeats. But this creature changed slowly, as if the magic itself was reluctant to let go of such magnificent power. Bones shortened and reformed, massive muscles condensed, silver-black fur receded to reveal human skin marked with scars that told stories of old battles. When the shift completed, a man stood in the wolf's place. He was tall enough to tower over her even at this distance, his shoulders broad and his frame carrying the kind of strength that came from a lifetime of violence. Dark hair fell across his face, but she could still see those burning golden eyes fixed on her with an expression of complete disbelief. "Impossible," he whispered, the word carrying across the clearing like a prayer or a curse. He took a step backward, then another, as if her very presence was something to be feared. The most dangerous predator in the known world was backing away from her, a nobody refugee with no name and no power. Lyra found her voice. "Please, I'm not here to challenge you. I just need somewhere to go." The man, the monster of the north, stared at her for another long moment. His hands were shaking, she realized. This creature of legend and nightmare was trembling as he looked at her. "You can't be here," he said finally, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't name. "You can't be real." "I don't understand." "Neither do I." He dragged his hands through his hair, the motion sharp with agitation. "You need to leave, now, before—" He cut himself off, but his eyes flicked toward the forest around them, and Lyra heard what he heard, howling in the distance, growing closer. Other wolves, drawn by the scent of an intruder, or perhaps by their alpha's distress. "Before what?" she asked. His gaze snapped back to her, and for a moment she saw past the monster to something that looked almost human, something that looked afraid. "Before I change my mind about letting you go." He shifted again, the massive dire wolf reforming in a cascade of silver light and raw power. But instead of attacking, instead of ending her life as quickly as he had ended so many others, he simply looked at her one more time with those impossible golden eyes. Then he turned and disappeared into the forest, leaving Lyra alone in the clearing with moonlight and questions, and the terrible certainty that nothing would ever be the same. Darkness claimed Lyra for 3 days and 3 nights. She drifted in and out of consciousness like someone caught between worlds, her body burning with fever while silver light flickered weakly beneath her skin. In her delirium, she could hear voices, Moira's worried murmurs, the soft conversations of healers, and underneath it all, the constant presence of something large and protective that never left her side. Kieran. Even in her fevered state, she could feel him through the mate bond, a steady anchor of warmth and strength that kept her from drifting too far into the darkness. When she finally surfaced on the 4th morning, it was to find herself back in the great bed of furs, but this time she wasn't alone. Kieran sat in the massive chair beside her, but he wasn't in human form. His dire wolf lay curled as close to the bed as his size would allow, his massive head resting on the mattress near her hand. The moment she stirred, his golden eyes snapped open, alert and focused on her face, with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You're awake." His mental voice through the pack bond was rough with relief and something deeper. "I was beginning to think that you'd lost me." Lyra's own voice was barely a whisper, her throat raw from days of fever. "How long?" 3 days. Your power burned too hot, too fast. Moira said you nearly killed yourself saving all of us." His wolf form shimmed, beginning to shift back to human. "Don't ever do that again." "Do what? Save our people?" "Sacrifice yourself for others without thinking about what it would do to me." He was human now, naked and magnificent and terrifying in his vulnerability as he moved to sit on the edge of the bed. "I can't lose you, Lyra. I won't survive it." She could see the truth of that statement in every line of his body, in the haunted exhaustion that spoke of 3 days spent in vigil. He looked like a man who had been preparing to follow her into death rather than face existence without her. "I'm not going anywhere." She tried to push herself up to sitting, but her arms shook with the effort. Immediately, Kieran's hands were there to support her, helping her lean back against the mountain of pillows. "Though I feel like I've been trampled by your entire pack. Your power overloaded, commanding 300 wolves at once, forcing them all to submit simultaneously." He shook his head in amazement. Even Silver Moon royalty at the height of their power rarely attempted something that massive. Did it work? Are our people safe? More than safe. Nearly half of the enemy wolves chose to stay and help with reconstruction. The others left peacefully, spreading word that the Northern Kingdom is under the protection of Silver Moon royalty. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "I suspect we'll be seeing a lot more refugees seeking sanctuary in the coming months." Lyra felt a warm glow of satisfaction at the news, but it was quickly overshadowed by a wave of dizziness that left her swaying despite the pillows supporting her. Kieran's hands steadied her immediately, but she could see the worry flickering in his golden eyes. "The mate bond," she said suddenly, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "That's why I'm not recovering, isn't it? The bond is incomplete and my wolf is—" "Calling for mine," he finished quietly. "Moira explained it to me while you were unconscious. Your power expenditure created an imbalance that can only be corrected by completing the bond." The words hung between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. They both knew what completion meant, the claiming ritual that had killed his first mate, the physical and spiritual joining that would either bind them forever or destroy one of them in the process. "And if we don't complete it?" Kieran's jaw tightened with pain he was trying to hide. You'll fade. Your wolf will continue calling for mine until the strain kills you both. How long do we have? Days, maybe weeks if you're strong enough, but each day will be harder than the last, and eventually... He couldn't finish the sentence, but they both understood. Lyra closed her eyes, feeling the truth of his words in the way her power flickered weakly in her veins. Her wolf was indeed calling for his, a desperate howl of need that grew stronger with each passing moment. The incomplete bond was like a wound that wouldn't heal, draining her strength and threatening to consume her entirely. "Then we complete it," she said simply. "Lyra, no." Kieran's voice was thick with anguish. "You don't understand what you're asking for. The ritual isn't gentle, isn't easy. My wolf is ancient and powerful and has been caged for 2 centuries. When it finally breaks free... When it breaks free, it will claim its mate." She opened her eyes to meet his gaze directly. "Which is exactly what it's supposed to do. What if I hurt you? What if I'm too strong, too overwhelming? What if you kill me like you killed Mira?" She saw him flinch at the direct words, but pressed on anyway. "Kieran, look at me. Really look." He met her eyes reluctantly, as if afraid of what he might see there. "I'm not Mira. I'm not human, not weak, not unprepared for what you are." Her voice grew stronger with each word, fed by the absolute certainty flowing through her veins. "I'm Silver Moon royalty with power that matches yours. I commanded 300 wolves into submission and survived it. Do you really think your claiming ritual is going to be what breaks me? Your power is what's failing right now. You can barely sit up without assistance. Because the bond is incomplete." The words came out sharper than she intended, edged with frustration at his stubborn protectiveness. "My power is unstable because it's trying to join with yours and can't. The claiming won't drain me, Kieran. It will stabilise me." "You don't know that for certain." "Then let's find out." She reached for his hands, her fingers wrapping around his with determined strength. "Because the alternative is watching me die slowly while you torture yourself with might-have-beens." For a long moment, they stared at each other across the space of the great bed. Lyra could see the war raging behind his golden eyes, love battling with fear, desperate need warring with protective instincts that had been shaped by 2 centuries of guilt and self-recrimination. Finally, he spoke. "If we do this, if we complete the bond, there's no going back. You'll be mine in every way that matters, and I'll be yours. Forever." Is that supposed to frighten me? It should. Mated dire wolves don't love gently, don't share easily. We're possessive and territorial and absolutely ruthless when it comes to protecting what's ours. His grip on her hands tightened unconsciously. "I won't be able to let you go, won't be able to give you space or independence or any of the things normal mates take for granted." "Good." The word came out fierce with conviction. "Because I don't want gentle or easy or normal. I want you exactly as you are, with all the intensity and possessiveness that comes with it." Something shifted in his expression, hope beginning to bloom where fear had dominated. "You're certain? Even knowing what it will cost you?" "The only thing it will cost me is the pretense that I could ever be happy without you." She brought his hands to her lips, pressing soft kisses to his scarred knuckles. "I choose you, Kieran. I choose us. I choose to trust that what we have is strong enough to survive whatever the claiming ritual throws at us." For another heartbeat, he hesitated. Then his control finally cracked completely. "If you die," he whispered, pulling her into his arms with desperate gentleness. "If this kills you like it killed her, I'll follow you into whatever comes after. I won't survive losing you." "Then it's a good thing you're not going to lose me." She settled against his chest, feeling his heartbeat thundering beneath her cheek. "When do we do this?" "Now." His voice was rough with decision and desperate need. "Before I lose my courage, before you change your mind, before we waste another moment being afraid of something that's as inevitable as breathing." He shifted his hold on her, lifting her in his arms with the careful strength of something precious and fragile. But as he carried her toward the massive bed's centre, Lyra felt anything but fragile. She felt like she was finally coming home to herself, like she was about to become everything she had been meant to be from the moment she was born. Outside, storm clouds gathered over the fortress, but inside the great chamber, silver and gold light began to bloom as two ancient bloodlines prepared to become one. The claiming was about to begin. 3 weeks after the mate bond completed, Lyra stood on the battlements of the fortress and marvelled at how much the world had changed. Below in the courtyard, construction crews worked alongside former enemies to rebuild the sections of wall damaged during the battle. The refugees who had once cowered in servant quarters now moved with the confidence of people who knew their value, their voices carrying across the stone as they directed repairs and planned expansions. And at the centre of it all, she could see Kieran moving between work groups with the easy authority of a king who was beloved rather than feared. The monster of the north had become something else entirely, a protector, a leader, a man who inspired loyalty through strength tempered with compassion. "Hard to believe it's only been 3 weeks," Moira said, joining her at the stone railing with 2 cups of steaming tea. "Feels like years since the battle." "It feels like a lifetime since I stumbled across those boundary stones half dead and desperate." Lyra accepted the tea gratefully, breathing in the warmth and comfort it represented. "Sometimes I look around and wonder if I'm dreaming." "Oh, you're not dreaming, Your Majesty, though I imagine some of your former pack members wish they were." Moira's smile was sharp with satisfaction. "Word reached us yesterday that Alpha Garrett's been stripped of his position. Seems the other packs didn't appreciate learning that he'd tried to force a political marriage on Silver Moon royalty." Lyra felt a moment of sympathy for her former Alpha, followed quickly by the recognition that he had brought his downfall on himself. "What about Marcus? Exiled, no pack will take him after what he tried to do to you." Moira sipped her tea thoughtfully. "Vivian's still scrubbing floors in our kitchens, though I have to admit she's starting to show some genuine remorse. Maybe there's hope for her yet. There's hope for everyone if they're willing to change." Lyra's gaze drifted back to the courtyard, where she could see Kieran laughing at something one of the workers had said. The sound carried up to the battlements like music, rich and warm and completely unguarded. "He's different too," Moira observed, following her line of sight. "The claiming changed him as much as it changed you." It was true. The mate bond had done more than stabilise Lyra's power and heal her from the battle's aftermath. It had also freed Kieran from 2 centuries of guilt and self-imposed isolation, allowing him to remember what it felt like to be part of something larger than his own pain. "We're different together than we were apart," Lyra said softly, "stronger, more complete. That's how true mate bonds are supposed to work, 2 halves finding their whole." Moira's voice carried the warmth of someone who had seen many love stories, but recognised this one as special. "Have you given any thought to making it official?" "Official?" "A royal mating ceremony, public vows before the assembled packs, the kind of celebration that makes political alliances and sends messages about the new order of things." Moira's eyes twinkled with mischief. "The kind that reminds everyone that Silver Moon royalty has returned to stay." Before Lyra could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention to the main road. A small procession was making its way up the mountain path, their banners displaying colours from at least 6 different packs. "More refugees?" Lyra asked. "No." Moira's voice was thoughtful as she studied the approaching riders. "Those are formal diplomatic banners. Official envoys by the look of it." Within the hour, the great hall had been transformed into a throne room. Representatives from 12 different packs knelt before Lyra and Kieran, their formal words of greeting acknowledging both the Silver Moon bloodline and the Northern Kingdom's sovereignty. "Your Majesties," the lead envoy began, his voice carrying the careful tones of someone delivering a prepared speech. "We come as messengers from the Grand Council of Alphas. They have sent us to extend formal recognition to the Northern Kingdom and to request audience with the Silver Moon heir." "Speak," Kieran commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone born to rule. But his hand found Lyra's where they sat side by side on the massive thrones that had been hastily constructed for the occasion, a gesture of partnership rather than dominance. "The Council wishes to propose a new treaty, one that recognises the Northern Kingdom as a sovereign territory under Silver Moon rule, with full rights to offer sanctuary to refugees from other pacts." The envoy's words were measured, diplomatic. In exchange, they asked for assurance that the Silver Moon bloodline will not seek to reclaim the territories that belong to your ancestors. Lyra felt Kieran tense beside her, his protective instincts flaring at what could be interpreted as a threat. But she squeezed his hand gently, a silent message that she would handle this. "Tell the Council that we have no interest in reclaiming territories that others have held for centuries," she said, her voice carrying the regal authority that had been awakening in her since the mate bond completed. "Our concern is not conquest, but sanctuary, not expansion, but protection." "However," Kieran added, his golden eyes blazing with unmistakable warning, "any pack that harms refugees seeking our protection, any alpha who tries to force our people back to situations they fled from, any attempt to interfere with our sovereignty—" He let the threat hang in the air like a blade. "Those would be acts of war." The envoys shifted nervously, clearly understanding that they were in the presence of something more dangerous than traditional political power. This was ancient authority backed by the kind of strength that could command armies with a word. "The Council will be pleased to hear of your reasonable position, Your Majesties. They also wish to extend an invitation for you to attend the Grand Moot next spring, where the new treaty can be formally signed." "We'll consider it," Lyra said graciously. "In the meantime, please convey our gratitude for the Council's recognition and our hope that this marks the beginning of a new era of cooperation between the packs." After the envoys departed with their diplomatic pouches and formal courtesies, Lyra and Kieran found themselves alone in the great hall for the first time in weeks. "A new era?" Kieran mused, pulling her into his arms with the easy intimacy that had developed since their bonding. "Is that what we're building here?" "We're building whatever we want to build." She settled against his chest, marvelling at how perfectly she fit against him, now that the mate bond had aligned their very souls. A kingdom of outcasts, a sanctuary for the broken, a place where worth is measured by character rather than bloodline. Ironic, considering you're the most noble bloodline of all. Maybe that's exactly why it works. Lyra tilted her head back to meet his gaze, seeing herself reflected in those golden depths that had become her home. "I know what it's like to be dismissed as worthless. I'll never let that happen to anyone under our protection." "Our protection," he repeated, his voice soft with wonder. "I still can't quite believe it's real, that you're real, that we survived everything that tried to tear us apart. We didn't just survive it, we used it to become stronger." She rose on her toes to press a soft kiss to his lips, tasting the promise of forever in his response. "Besides, you're stuck with me now. The mate bond doesn't come with an escape clause." "Good." His arms tightened around her possessively. "Because I plan to keep you for several lifetimes at least." Several lifetimes sounds perfect. As they stood together in the hall that had witnessed so much pain and transformation, Lyra felt the rightness of it all settle into her bones like recognition. This place, this man, this future they were building together. It was exactly what she had been meant for. She had started as nobody from nowhere, running from a fate she couldn't accept. She had become Silver Moon royalty, the queen of the Northern Kingdom, the mate of a dire wolf king who had learned to love without destroying. But more than any title or bloodline or political recognition, she had become herself. Fully, completely, unapologetically herself. And that, more than any crown or ceremony, felt like the greatest victory of all. 1 year later, the Northern Kingdom had become the most prosperous territory in the known world. Lyra stood in the nursery of their private quarters, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly as she watched the sun rise over mountains that no longer seemed cursed or forbidden. The fortress had grown in the past months, new wings added to accommodate the steady stream of refugees who continued to arrive seeking sanctuary. What had once been a place of exile had become a beacon of hope. "She's restless today," Kieran said softly, moving to stand behind her with his large hands covering hers over their unborn daughter. "I can feel her moving through the bond. She knows something important is happening." Lyra leaned back against his chest, marvelling at how perfectly they fit together even now, even with her body changed by pregnancy. The ceremony tonight, all the visiting dignitaries, she can sense the excitement. Tonight marked the first anniversary of their mate bonding, and Pax from across the realm had sent representatives to attend the celebration. But more than that, it was the formal coronation ceremony that would officially recognise them as the ruling monarchs of the Northern Kingdom. "Are you nervous?" Kieran asked, his lips brushing against her temple. "About ruling a kingdom? About being responsible for thousands of lives? About raising a daughter who will inherit both Dire Wolf and Silver Moon bloodlines?" Lyra smiled, feeling utterly at peace despite the magnitude of what lay ahead. "Not even a little." "Good, because I have something for you." He moved away briefly, returning with a circlet of silver and moonstone that seemed to capture and reflect the morning light. It was beautiful and ancient, clearly made by craftsmen who understood the significance of what they were creating. "The Silver Moon crown," Lyra breathed, recognising the symbols carved into the precious metal. "Where did you find this?" "Moira's been working with scholars and historians for months, tracking down artefacts from your bloodline. This was hidden in a vault beneath the old Silver Moon capital, protected by wards that only recognised royal blood." He held the circlet with reverent care. "It belongs to you by right of birth and conquest." Lyra touched the moonstone centrepiece, feeling power thrumming through the ancient metal. This crown had been worn by her ancestors, by queens who had ruled with wisdom and strength before fear and jealousy drove their line into hiding. "Will you help me put it on?" "It would be my honour, Your Majesty." The moment the Silver Moon crown settled onto her head, something shifted in the very fabric of the world around them. The power that had been growing in Lyra since her awakening suddenly stabilised, finding its perfect expression through the ancient artefact that had been crafted specifically to channel royal magic. She turned to face the mirror, and for the first time saw herself as others saw her, not the frightened servant girl who had fled through cursed territory, but the Silver Moon Queen who had built a kingdom on the principles of protection and compassion. "Beautiful," Kieran murmured, his golden eyes warm with pride and love, and terrifying, beautifully terrifying. "Is that how you see me? That's how the world sees you, how our enemies see you." His hand settled on her shoulders, warm and possessive. "How I see you is different. How do you see me?" "As home, as the other half of my soul, as the woman brave enough to touch a monster and find a man worth saving." His voice was soft with the kind of love that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger. "As my mate, my queen, my everything." The ceremony that evening was unlike anything the Northern Kingdom had ever witnessed. Representatives from 30 different packs filled the great hall, their voices raised in formal recognition as Lyra and Kieran took their vows of kingship. But it was the moment when they renewed their mate bond publicly that truly marked the transformation of everything they had built. Standing before the assembled crowd, Kieran spoke the ancient words with a voice that carried to every corner of the hall. "I, Kieran Blackwood, last of the Dire Wolf bloodline, claim you as my mate, my queen, my equal in all things. What I am I share with you, what I have I give to you. Where I rule, you rule beside me." Lyra's response was equally powerful, her voice ringing with Silver Moon authority. I, Lyra of the Silver Moon, accept your claim and make my own. What I am, I share with you. What I have, I give to you. Where I rule, you rule beside me. Together we are more than the sum of our parts. Together we are unbreakable. The moment their hands joined, silver and gold light exploded through the hall, washing over every person present with the unmistakable power of a completed royal bonding. This wasn't just a political ceremony or a romantic declaration. It was the universe itself acknowledging that these two beings had been crafted to complement each other perfectly. When the light faded, every wolf in the hall knelt in spontaneous recognition of what they had witnessed. The monster of the north and the lost Silver Moon heir had become something unprecedented, a ruling pair whose combined power could protect the innocent and humble the arrogant in equal measure. Later, when the last of the guests had departed and the celebrations had wound down, Lyra and Kieran found themselves alone on their private balcony overlooking the kingdom they had built together. "Do you ever think about that night?" Lyra asked, settling into the chair that had been specially crafted to accommodate both her pregnancy and Kieran's tendency to pull her into his lap. "When I first stumbled into your territory." "Every day." His arms came around her automatically, cradling both her and their unborn daughter with infinite gentleness. "I think about how close I came to losing you before I even knew what you meant to me." "You wouldn't have lost me. I was already yours the moment our eyes met in that clearing." She turned in his embrace to face him fully. "I just didn't understand it yet." "Neither did I. I thought you were another refugee to protect, another broken soul to offer sanctuary." His golden eyes were soft with memory and wonder. "I had no idea you were my salvation." "Mutual salvation," she corrected gently. "You saved me from a life of servitude and abuse. I saved you from an eternity of isolation and guilt." "Fair point." He pressed a kiss to the crown that had become as much a part of her as breathing. "Though I think our daughter is going to save us both from ever being bored again." As if summoned by his words, their baby chose that moment to deliver a particularly strong kick that made both parents laugh with delight and amazement. "She's going to be powerful," Lyra murmured, one hand resting on her belly while the other covered Kieran's larger one. Dire wolf strength and Silver Moon magic raised by parents who understand what it means to be different. "She's going to be loved," Kieran said firmly, "unconditionally, completely, fiercely loved by a family that will never let her doubt her worth. And she's going to know she has choices. That power is something to be used wisely, not wielded carelessly." Lyra's voice carried the conviction of someone who had learned these lessons through hard experience. She'll never have to hide what she is or apologize for being extraordinary. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the lights of their kingdom twinkle in the valleys below. Every light represented a life they had helped, a family they had protected, a person who had found safety under their rule. "Thank you," Lyra said suddenly. "For what?" "For seeing me when everyone else looked right through me, for giving me a place where I could become who I was meant to be, for loving me enough to risk everything on the chance that we could be extraordinary together." Kieran's response was a kiss that tasted of promises and forever, of a love that had been tested by fire and emerged as something unbreakable. When they broke apart, Lyra rested her forehead against his, silver eyes meeting gold in perfect understanding. "They called you the Monster of the North," she whispered, echoing the title that had brought her to him in the first place. "And what do they call me now?" he asked, though they both knew the answer. "The Guardian of the North, the Protector King, the mate of Silver Moon royalty who rules with wisdom and strength." Her smile was radiant with joy and hard-won peace. "But I know what you really are." "What's that?" "You're the man who caught me when I was falling and taught me how to fly. You're my home, my heart, my happily ever after." She pressed one final kiss to his lips, sealing the words between them like a vow. You're mine, and I'm yours, and that's all we ever needed to be. Outside their window, the Northern Kingdom slept peacefully under the protection of its unlikely rulers. A former monster and a supposed nobody who had discovered they were meant to be everything to each other. And in the distance wolves howled a song of contentment and belonging that echoed across the mountains like a lullaby for the child who would inherit a kingdom built on love, forged in fire, and destined to last for generations. The blizzard came from nowhere. One moment Lyra was picking her way carefully along the mountain path, and the next she was blind in a wall of snow and ice that cut through her cloak like knives. The wind howled with voices that sounded almost human, almost like screaming, and the cold bit so deep into her bones that she could barely feel her fingers wrapped around the walking stick she had cut from a fallen branch. This was not natural weather. This was something designed to kill. She pressed forward anyway, one foot in front of the other, because stopping meant freezing to death in minutes. The path had disappeared beneath the snow, and she could no longer tell if she was walking deeper into the territory or in circles. Her wolf remained stubbornly silent, offering no guidance through the supernatural storm. The cold was winning. Her legs shook with each step, and her vision was starting to blur at the edges. She had survived 3 days without food, fled her pack with nothing but the clothes on her back, and walked for hours into cursed territory. Her body was finally reaching its limits. She stumbled and went down hard, her knees hitting the frozen ground with enough force to send pain shooting up her spine. The walking stick rolled away into the snow, lost immediately in the white chaos around her. Lyra tried to push herself back up, but her arms wouldn't support her weight. The blizzard pressed down on her like a living thing, burying her in cold and darkness, and the whisper of wind that spoke in dead languages. She was going to die here, alone in the cursed lands, just another body to add to the monster's collection. At least it would be over quickly. Through the storm she heard the sound of massive paws hitting the ground, heavy, deliberate, moving toward her with the confidence of something that owned every inch of this territory. The monster of the north had come to finish what the blizzard had started. Lyra managed to lift her head just enough to see him emerge from the white wall of snow like something out of nightmare. The dire wolf was even more massive than she remembered, his silver-black fur untouched by the storm that was killing her. Ice crystals clung to his muzzle, but his golden eyes burned with their own inner fire as they fixed on her collapsed form. He stopped just beyond her reach and stared down at her, waiting, deciding whether she was worth the effort of a clean kill or if he should simply let the cold finish the job. But he didn't attack. Instead, he moved closer, each step measured and careful, as if approaching something that might shatter if handled too roughly. When he reached her side, he lowered his massive head until his muzzle was inches from her face, and she felt the warmth of his breath against her frozen skin. Those impossible golden eyes studied her with an intensity that made her feel stripped bare, seen, recognized in ways that went deeper than sight. Then he did something that defied every story ever told about the monster of the north. He whined. The sound was soft and distressed, coming from deep in his chest like the cry of something wounded. It was the sound of confusion and desperate need, of a creature that had been alone so long he had forgotten what companionship felt like. Before Lyra could process what was happening, the world tilted. Strong jaws closed gently around her waist, lifting her from the snow with the careful precision of something that knew exactly how much pressure human bodies could withstand. She should have been terrified, should have fought or screamed or accepted her death with dignity. Instead, she felt safe. The dire wolf carried her through the blizzard like she weighed nothing, navigating the treacherous mountain path with the sure-footed grace of something that had walked these trails for decades. The storm parted around him as if it recognized its master, the supernatural cold retreating until Lyra could feel warmth returning to her frozen limbs. She must have lost consciousness somewhere during the journey, because the next thing she knew, she was lying on something soft and warm. Furs, real furs from creatures she couldn't identify, piled thick enough to make a bed fit for royalty. The air around her was mercifully warm, heated by a fire she could hear crackling somewhere nearby. Lyra opened her eyes and found herself in a room that defied everything she had expected from the monster's lair. The space was enormous, built to accommodate someone much larger than any normal human. The ceiling soared overhead, supported by stone pillars carved with symbols that looked ancient beyond measure. Tapestries hung from the walls, depicting scenes of battles and hunts and ceremonies from ages long past. Everything was sized for giants, but it was also beautiful in a way that spoke of careful attention and artistic eye. This was not the crude cave of a savage beast. This was the hall of a king. "You're awake," the voice came from the shadows near the great fireplace, and Lyra turned her head to see him standing there in human form. He had not moved closer while she slept, she realized. He stood at the very edge of the firelight, as if there were invisible barriers keeping him at a distance. In the warm glow of the flames, she could see him more clearly than she had in the moonlit clearing. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps only a few years older than her own 22 winters. But his face carried the weight of someone who had lived through things that aged the soul faster than the body. Scars traced silver lines across his chest and arms, marking him as a warrior who had survived battles that would have killed lesser men. He was beautiful in the way that dangerous things were beautiful. Sharp edges and raw power barely contained beneath human skin. "Why did you save me?" she asked, her voice still hoarse from the cold. He was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, the words came out carefully, as if he were testing their weight before letting them into the world. "I don't know." It was not the answer she had expected. Monsters were supposed to be certain of their motivations. They killed or they didn't kill, they helped or they didn't help. They didn't stand in the shadows looking confused and afraid of their own choices. "The stories say you kill anyone who enters your territory." "I do." His golden eyes met hers across the room, and she saw something flicker in their depths. Pain, maybe, or regret. "I have to." "But you didn't kill me." "No." The word came out quiet and uncertain. "I should have. I don't understand why I can't." Lyra pushed herself up to sitting, the furs pooling around her waist. Someone had removed her wet cloak and boots while she slept, but her dress had been left untouched. Careful hands that knew how to tend to someone without taking liberties. "What's your name?" she asked. He stiffened as if the question had struck him physically. "Names have power in the old magic. It's better if you don't know." "The stories call you the monster of the north. Is that what you prefer?" Something that might have been a smile ghosted across his features, bitter and sharp. "The stories call me many things. Most of them are true." "But not all of them." "No, not all of them." Lyra studied his face in the firelight, looking for the savage beast from the legends. She saw strength and violence and the capacity for terrible things, but she also saw loneliness so profound it made her chest ache. This was not a creature who killed for pleasure. This was someone who had been alone for so long that he had forgotten how to be anything else. "You can stay until the storms pass," he said abruptly, as if the words had been torn from him against his will. "There's food and water, and the servants will see to anything you need, but you can't stay long. It's not safe." "Safe from what?" His eyes flicked toward the windows, where she could see snow still falling in the moonlight. "From me." Before she could ask what he meant, he was moving toward the great doors at the far end of the hall. His stride was controlled but urgent, as if he were fleeing rather than simply leaving. "Wait," Lyra called after him. "I don't even know your name." He stopped with his hand on the door handle, his shoulders tense with whatever internal battle he was fighting. "Kieran," he said without turning around. "My name is Kieran." Then he was gone, leaving her alone in the magnificent hall with nothing but the crackle of the fire and the whisper of wind outside the windows. But even after the door closed behind him, she could feel something connecting them, a golden thread of warmth that stretched between them like a bridge across impossible distance. Somewhere in the depths of the fortress she heard howling, long and mournful and filled with the kind of pain that came from wanting something you could never have. The monster of the north was pacing his own battlements, and Lyra was beginning to understand that she was not the only prisoner in this place. Lyra woke to the sound of quiet footsteps and the gentle clink of dishes being set on a table. She opened her eyes to find a woman arranging breakfast on a massive wooden table that could have seated 20 people. The woman was middle-aged with greying hair pulled back in a practical bun, her movements efficient and careful as she laid out fresh bread, meat, and what looked like honey from wild mountain hives. "Good morning, dear," the woman said, without turning around. Her voice was warm, but carried the kind of quiet authority that came from years of managing difficult situations. "I'm Moira. I help keep this place running." Lyra sat up among the furs, suddenly conscious of her tangled hair and wrinkled dress. "I'm Lyra. I don't know how long I'm supposed to stay, or what I'm supposed to do, or—" "You're supposed to eat," Moira interrupted gently, finally turning to face her with kind eyes that had seen too much of the world. "And rest, and let your body recover from whatever hell you've been through to end up here." There was something about the woman's tone that made Lyra's throat tight with unexpected emotion. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to her with simple kindness, without judgment or calculation. "Where is he?" Lyra asked. "Kieran?" Moira's expression shifted, becoming carefully neutral in the way that people did when they were protecting secrets. "The Alpha doesn't usually take meals in the Great Hall. He prefers to keep his distance from guests." "Guests? How many people end up here?" "More than you might think." Moira moved to the windows and pulled back heavy curtains, letting grey morning light spill into the hall. "This place has always been a refuge for those who have nowhere else to go." Lyra climbed out of the massive bed and walked to the table, her bare feet silent on the cold stone floor. The food smelled incredible, and her empty stomach reminded her that it had been days since her last real meal. But her eyes were drawn to the details of the room that she had missed in the firelight. Everything was built for someone much larger than any human had a right to be. The table was too high, the chairs too wide, the doorways too tall. Even the serving dishes were oversized, as if designed for hands that could palm a man's head like a ball. "He's very large, isn't he?" Lyra said quietly, "even in human form." "Aye, the old bloodlines tend to run big." Moira set down a cup of something that steamed and smelled like herbs and comfort. "Eat, child. You'll need your strength." Lyra took a bite of the bread and had to close her eyes at the taste. Real food, made by someone who cared about more than just survival. When she opened her eyes again, Moira was watching her with an expression of deep sadness. "How long since you've eaten properly?" "I don't remember." The admission came out smaller than Lyra had intended. "My pack. There wasn't enough food for everyone. Servants ate last, and there was rarely anything left." Moira's jaw tightened with anger that wasn't directed at Lyra. What pack would let one of their own go hungry? The kind that never considered me one of their own. Their loss. Moira's voice was fierce with conviction. "Though I suspect you'll find things different here." Before Lyra could ask what she meant, the great doors at the far end of the hall opened. Kieran stepped through, and Lyra's breath caught in her throat. In daylight, he was even more overwhelming than he had been by firelight. He stood just inside the doorway, as if there were invisible barriers preventing him from coming closer, his golden eyes finding her across the room with an intensity that made her skin feel warm. "You're awake," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "Yes, Moira was just—" "I can see." His gaze flicked to the older woman, and something passed between them. a conversation in looks and small gestures that Lyra couldn't interpret. "I need to speak with you." Moira nodded and began gathering the serving dishes. "I'll leave you to it. Lyra, dear, there are clothes in the wardrobe that should fit you. Clean things, warm things. You're welcome to anything you need." She paused by Kieran on her way out, rising on her toes to whisper something in his ear that made his shoulders tense. Then she was gone, leaving Lyra alone with the man who had haunted her dreams. Kieran remained by the door, his hands clasped behind his back like a soldier at attention. The distance between them felt deliberate and painful, as if he were forcing himself to stay away from something he desperately wanted. "The storm has passed," he said. "The roads will be clear by evening." Lyra felt something cold settle in her stomach. "You want me to leave. I want you to be safe." The words came out rough, like they hurt to say. "This place isn't safe for someone like you." "Someone like me?" His eyes closed briefly, as if he were fighting some internal battle. "Someone innocent, someone who still has a chance at a normal life." Lyra set down her cup with more force than necessary. "I told you last night. I have nowhere else to go. My pack wants to force me into marriage as punishment for crimes I didn't commit. If I leave here, I'll have to keep running until I find another territory that will take me in, and most alphas don't look kindly on lone wolves with no family name." "Then find a different pack, a better one." "You think I haven't tried?" The words came out sharper than she intended, edged with months of frustration and rejection. "Do you know what it's like to be nobody? To have no bloodline, no family, no wolf strong enough to be useful? I'm not exactly a valuable addition to any pack." Kieran's hands clenched behind his back. "You're more valuable than you know." "Am I? Because my own pack was happy to get rid of me. The only reason they want me back is to humiliate me further." "They're fools." The certainty in his voice made her look up sharply. He was staring at her with an expression she couldn't name, something fierce and protective and desperate. "You don't know me," she said quietly. "You don't know what I'm worth." "I know enough." He took a step toward her, then caught himself and stepped back. The movement looked like it cost him something. "I know you're braver than most warriors I've met. I know you'd rather face death than submission. I know—" He cut himself off, dragging his hands through his hair with sharp frustration. "You know what?" Lyra prompted. "Nothing. It doesn't matter what I know." His voice was hollow now, resigned. "You need to leave before nightfall. I'll have Moira pack supplies for your journey." "What if I don't want to leave?" The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Kieran went very still, his golden eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that made her feel stripped bare. "You don't know what you're asking." "Then tell me." Lyra stood up from the table, moving closer to him, despite the way he tensed like a cornered animal. "Tell me why you saved me. Tell me why you're afraid to come near me. Tell me why looking at you feels like—" "Like what?" The words came out barely above a whisper. "Like coming home to a place I've never been." Kieran made a sound that was half growl, half groan. "You can't say things like that." "Why not?" "Because it makes this impossible." He was backing toward the door now, his control visibly fraying. "Because it makes me want things I can never have." "What things?" But he was already moving, his long strides carrying him toward the exit with desperate urgency. At the doorway, he paused without turning around. "There's a library on the second floor, and a garden courtyard if you want fresh air. Just don't go into the tower. The stairs are marked with red paint. Don't go up there." "Why not?" "Because that's where I go when I need to keep myself from doing something we both regret." Then he was gone again, leaving Lyra alone with her questions and the strange golden warmth that pulled at her chest every time he was near. She spent the day exploring the fortress, marvelling at its size and unexpected beauty. Every room was built for giants but decorated with care. Tapestries told stories of ancient battles, sculptures depicted wolves and warriors in poses of strength and grace, and libraries held books in languages she couldn't read but somehow found familiar. And everywhere she went, she met others like herself. A young woman with a scarred face who tended the gardens, an older man with a missing arm who maintained the weapons, a family with children whose eyes held the haunted look of those who had seen too much. Outcasts, all of them, people with nowhere else to go, finding safety in the domain of the monster of the north. "He's not what they say he is," the scarred woman told her as they walked through the courtyard together. "He's dangerous, yes, more dangerous than anything you can imagine, but he's not cruel. He doesn't hurt people who don't deserve it." "Then why do they call him a monster?" The woman was quiet for a long moment, her fingers trailing over the petals of winter roses that should not have been blooming in this cold. Because monsters are easier to fear than broken kings are to understand. That night, Lyra lay in the great bed listening to the sound of howling echoing from somewhere high above. Long, mournful cries that spoke of loneliness and longing and the kind of pain that had no cure. The tower. He was in the tower, transformed and pacing and fighting whatever battle raged inside him. She fell asleep to the sound of his grief, and dreamed of golden eyes and silver fur and the taste of something she had never had but missed desperately anyway. Moira found Lyra in the library the next morning, surrounded by books written in the old tongue and looking frustrated with her inability to read them. "Those are histories," the older woman said, settling into one of the massive chairs with a cup of tea. "Stories of the first shifters, the ancient bloodlines, the wars that shaped our world. I wish I could read them." Lyra closed the leather-bound tome carefully, running her fingers over symbols that seemed to shimmer in the morning light. "My pack never thought education was important for servants." "Your pack sounds like they were idiots." Moira's tone was matter-of-fact, but her eyes blazed with anger. "A mind is a terrible thing to waste, especially one as sharp as yours." "You barely know me." "I know enough. You survived whatever hell drove you from your home, walked into cursed territory rather than accept a fate you couldn't bear, and you're sitting here trying to educate yourself instead of cowering in fear." Moira sipped her tea thoughtfully. "That tells me everything I need to know about your character." Lyra traced the symbols on the book's cover, feeling strangely drawn to their flowing lines. "Can you read these?" "Some. I've been here long enough to pick up bits and pieces." Moira leaned forward, her voice dropping to the tone people used for sharing secrets. "Would you like to know what that one says?" "Please." "It's the story of the dire wolves, the old bloodlines that produced wolves larger and stronger than any others. They were the first alphas, the kings and queens of the shifter world until—" "Until what?" Moira was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant with memory. "Until they became too powerful for their own good. The other packs feared them, and fear makes people do terrible things. Wars were fought, bloodlines were hunted to extinction. The few dire wolf families that survived went into hiding or exile." A chill ran down Lyra's spine as understanding began to dawn. "Kieran is the last of his line as far as anyone knows. His family ruled the Northern Territories for centuries. But power like that always comes with a price." Moira's voice grew soft with sympathy. "He's been alone for longer than you can imagine, child. Longer than anyone should have to be." "How long?" "Nearly 200 years. Lyra's breath caught. "That's impossible. He doesn't look older than 30. Dire wolves age differently. They're built to last, to rule for centuries if they live long enough." Moira stood and walked to one of the tall windows, gazing out at the snow-covered courtyard. "But living that long when you're completely alone, it does things to a man, changes him in ways that can't be undone." "Is that why he won't come near me? Because he's afraid of what 2 centuries of isolation have done to him?" Moira turned back to her with a look of surprise. "Oh, child, you really don't understand, do you?" "Understand what?" "He's not afraid of what he's become. He's afraid of what he might do to you." Moira returned to her chair, leaning forward with the intensity of someone sharing a crucial truth. "There was a woman long ago, before the exile, before the loneliness ate away at everything human inside him. Her name was Mira, and she was his mate. The word hit Lyra like a physical blow. Mate. The golden thread she felt connecting her to Kieran suddenly felt like a lie, a cruel joke played by a universe that delighted in impossible situations. "What happened to her?" Lyra asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. "She died." Moira's voice was gentle but unflinching. "During the claiming ritual, his wolf was too large, too powerful for a normal shifter to handle. The bond was too intense, the physical strain too great. Her heart gave out." Lyra felt the blood drain from her face. He killed her. Not intentionally, never intentionally, but the result was the same. Moira reached across the space between them and took Lyra's cold hands in her warm ones. He spent 2 centuries believing that his touch is death, that his love is a curse that destroys everything it claims. He exiled himself not just from other packs, but from any possibility of connection. But he saved me. He brought me here. Aye, and that terrifies him more than any enemy he's ever faced. Moira squeezed her hands gently. "Because what he feels for you is exactly what he felt for Mira, and he'd rather die than watch it kill you too." Lyra pulled her hands free and stood abruptly, pacing to the window where she could see the tower rising against the grey sky. Somewhere up there, Kieran was fighting his own demons, convinced that caring for her was a death sentence. "I need to talk to him." "Child, I don't think that's... He can't make decisions for me based on something that happened 200 years ago." Lyra's voice was fierce with determination. "I'm not her. I'm not some fragile flower who'll break at the first touch of real power. You don't understand what you're asking for. A dire wolf's claiming isn't gentle, it's primal and violent and overwhelming. His wolf is ancient and powerful and has been caged for 2 centuries. When it finally breaks free, then maybe it's time someone showed him that not everyone breaks." Moira stared at her for a long moment, then shook her head with what might have been admiration or despair. "You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the most foolish." "Probably both." Lyra headed for the library door, her spine straight with resolve. "Where would I find him during the day?" "The training yards. Most likely. He spends his days working out the frustration he can't release any other way." Moira's voice followed her to the door. "But Lyra, be careful. He's hanging on by a thread, and you might be the thing that finally breaks it." Lyra found him in the courtyard behind the main hall, and the sight of him stopped her in her tracks. He had stripped off his shirt despite the cold, and his body moved with lethal grace as he fought invisible opponents with a massive sword that would have been too heavy for any normal man to lift. Sweat gleamed on his scarred skin, and his muscles coiled and released with each swing in a display of raw power that was both beautiful and terrifying. This was what 200 years of barely contained violence looked like. This was a predator in his prime, honed to a killing edge by decades of self-imposed isolation. He must have sensed her watching, because he stopped mid-swing and turned toward her. His golden eyes locked on hers across the courtyard, and she saw the exact moment he realized she knew. "Moira told you." It wasn't a question. "She told me about Mira." Lyra stepped into the courtyard, her bare feet silent on the cold stone. "She told me why you think touching me would be a death sentence." Kieran's grip on the sword tightened until his knuckles went white. "Then you understand why you need to leave." "I understand why you're afraid." She took another step closer, and he took one back. "But I also understand that you're not the same man you were 200 years ago, and I'm not the same woman she was." "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" Lyra's voice was steady, certain. "You've spent 2 centuries believing you're a monster because one terrible accident taught you that your power could destroy the thing you loved most. But look around you, Kieran. Look at this place, at the people you've saved, at the refuge you've built for those who have nowhere else to go. Does that sound like the work of a monster?" "I killed her." The words came out raw and broken. I felt her heart stop beating while my wolf claimed her. I held her body while she died, and I knew it was my fault. It was an accident. It was inevitable. He was backing toward the castle walls now, his control visibly fraying. This is what I am. This is what my bloodline creates. I am too much for any normal shifter to survive. Then it's a good thing I've never been normal. The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Kieran went completely still, his golden eyes searching her face for something she couldn't name. What do you mean? I mean, I've always been different, weaker than other wolves, according to my pack. But what if they were wrong? What if I wasn't weak, but just suppressed, hidden? Lyra took another step toward him, and this time he didn't retreat. What if the reason your wolf recognized me isn't because I'm another victim waiting to happen, but because I'm strong enough to match you? That's impossible. Is it? Look at me, Kieran. Really look. She stood in front of him now, close enough to touch but not quite daring to bridge that final gap. I walked into cursed territory alone, rather than submit to a fate I couldn't accept. I survived your blizzard and your forests and the sight of your wolf without running. I'm standing here asking you to trust me when everyone else runs from you in terror. Does that sound weak to you? His breathing was ragged now, his wolf close enough to the surface that she could see gold bleeding into his human eyes. You don't understand what you're asking for. I'm asking you to stop deciding my fate for me. I'm asking you to let me choose what risks I want to take. She reached out slowly, giving him every chance to pull away, and placed her palm flat against his chest. I'm asking you to trust that maybe, just maybe, I'm exactly what I was meant to be, what we were meant to be. The moment her skin touched his, the world exploded into gold and silver light. The mate bond that had been simmering between them since their first meeting suddenly blazed to life with an intensity that drove them both to their knees. And for the first time in 200 years, Kieran didn't pull away. The sound of horses approaching at dawn shattered the fragile peace that had settled over the fortress. Lyra woke to the commotion in the courtyard below, voices raised in command and challenge echoing off the stone walls. She dressed quickly and made her way to the great hall, where she found Kieran standing at the tall windows with his back rigid and his hands clenched into fists. "How many?" she asked, moving to stand beside him. 15, maybe 20. His voice was controlled, but she could hear the edge of violence underneath. "Armed and bearing your pack's colours." Through the window, Lyra could see the riders assembled in the courtyard. They sat their horses with the arrogance of men who expected to be obeyed, their weapons displayed openly despite being guests in another Alpha's territory. At their head rode a man she recognised with sick dread. Alpha Garrett himself had come for her. "They'll demand to see you," Kieran said, without looking away from the window. "Pack law gives them that right, as long as you haven't been formally claimed by another Alpha. And if I refuse to see them, then I refuse them entry to my territory, and this becomes a territorial dispute." His golden eyes flicked to her face. "Are you prepared for that?" Before Lyra could answer, the great doors swung open and Moira entered with her usual brisk efficiency. "The Millbrook Pack requests an audience with their missing member. They're demanding immediate compliance with pack law." Kieran's jaw tightened. "Tell them she'll receive them in the Great Hall, under my protection and according to my rules." "And those rules are?" "No weapons drawn in my presence, no threats made under my roof, and no one touches her without her explicit consent." His voice dropped to something that was barely human. "Make sure they understand that last one is not negotiable." Moira nodded and hurried out, leaving Lyra alone with Kieran's barely contained fury. She could feel his wolf pacing just beneath his skin, ready to tear apart anyone who dared threaten what he considered his. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "I can send them away, tell them you're under my protection and they have no claim here." "And start a war between packs over someone like me?" Lyra shook her head. I won't be responsible for that kind of bloodshed. Someone like you. Kieran turned away from the window to face her fully, his golden eyes blazing with an emotion she couldn't name. You still don't see it, do you? You still think you're nobody special, nobody worth fighting for. I'm a servant girl with no bloodline and no power. What else would I be? Mine. The word came out fierce and possessive, making something deep in her chest flutter with warmth. You're mine, and I don't give up what belongs to me. Before she could respond to that declaration, the great doors opened again, and Alpha Garrett strode in with 5 of his best warriors at his back. He was a large man with greying hair and cold eyes, the kind of Alpha who ruled through intimidation and casual cruelty. Behind him walked his son Marcus, a younger version of his father with the same predatory smile. Lyra felt herself shrinking back instinctively, years of conditioning making her want to disappear under their attention. But Kieran stepped in front of her, his massive frame blocking her from their view. Alpha Garrett. His voice was polite, but edged with warning. You're a long way from your territory. Kieran Blackwood, the monster of the north himself. Garrett's smile was all teeth and no warmth. I've come for what belongs to my pack. Nothing here belongs to your pack. The girl does. Lyra is bound by pack law to return and face justice for her crimes. She's also betrothed to my son by my decree. Garrett's eyes flicked around Kieran to find her cowering behind him. There she is. Come here, girl. It's time to go home. Lyra felt the old fear trying to drag her forward, the ingrained need to obey when alphas gave commands. But Kieran's presence at her back was like a wall of strength, and she found her voice. I committed no crimes. Your daughter planted those items in my belongings. Marcus stepped forward with a laugh that made her skin crawl. Still telling that lie? No one believes you, sweetheart. Vivian has no reason to frame a servant. She had every reason. She was jealous that... Lyra cut herself off before she could say too much. Jealous of what? Garrett's voice was sharp with interest. Kieran's hand found her shoulder, warm and steady and grounding. It doesn't matter what she was jealous of. What matters is that Lyra is under my protection now. Protection? Garrett's laugh was ugly. What use could the monster of the north have for a weak servant girl? Unless... His eyes narrowed as he took in the way Kieran stood over her, the possessive set of his shoulders. Unless you're thinking of claiming her yourself. Is that it, Blackwood? Getting lonely up here in your frozen wasteland? Watch your tone. Kieran's voice dropped to something that made the temperature in the room seem to plummet. You're a guest in my territory, not a conqueror. I'm here under pack law to retrieve stolen property. Garrett gestured dismissively at Lyra. The girl belongs to my son by right of betrothal. If you've touched her, if you've compromised her in any way, she is not property. Each word came out precise and deadly. And she belongs to no one but herself. Marcus spoke up, on his voice oily with false concern. Now, let's not turn this into a territorial dispute over something so insignificant. The girl is weak, worthless except as a broodmare. Surely you can find better entertainment than damaged goods. The words hit Lyra like physical blows, confirming everything she had always believed about herself. She was nothing, nobody, a burden that everyone wanted to pass off to someone else. But then Kieran moved. It wasn't a shift, wasn't a transformation. It was something more subtle and infinitely more terrifying. His presence expanded to fill the room like a living thing, pressing against everyone present with the weight of absolute authority. His eyes blazed gold, and when he spoke, his voice carried the power of something ancient and unstoppable. She is under my protection. The words hit the assembled wolves like a physical force. Even Garrett stepped back involuntarily, his alpha dominance crumbling in the face of something far more powerful than pack politics. You want to know what use I have for her? Kieran continued, his voice deadly quiet. She walked into my cursed territory alone, rather than submit to a fate she couldn't bear. She survived my forests, my storms, my wolves, and stood her ground when she saw me in my true form. She has more courage in her smallest finger than all of you have combined." He stepped forward, and Garrett's warriors instinctively reached for weapons they weren't allowed to draw. "She is not weak. She is not worthless, and she is not yours." Kieran's eyes swept over them with contempt. "You had a treasure in your midst and treated her like trash. Your loss, Garrett. Your son's loss. Your pack's loss." "She's betrothed to Marcus by my word." "Then unbetrothal her." Kieran's smile was all predator. "Because she's not leaving here with you. Not today. Not ever." The silence that followed was thick with threat and possibility. Lyra could see Garrett calculating, weighing his chances against the dire wolf alpha who ruled these mountains like a king of old. Marcus looked between his father and Kieran with growing panic, realizing that his easy prize was slipping away. "The council will hear of this," Garrett said finally. "You can't simply steal another alpha's property." "I said she wasn't property." Kieran's voice was silk over steel. "But if you want to make this official, then let's make it official." He turned to Lyra, his golden eyes searching her face. "The choice is yours. Go with them and face whatever justice they think you deserve, or stay here under my protection as a member of my pack." "Your pack?" Marcus sputtered. "You don't have a pack. You're a lone wolf, an exile." "I have a pack." Kieran's gaze never left Lyra's face. "Everyone who lives under my protection is part of my pack. Everyone who chooses to stay becomes family. The question is whether she wants to be part of that family." Lyra felt the weight of everyone's attention, the pressure of a decision that would change everything. Behind her stretched years of servitude and humiliation, a future of unwanted marriage and slow destruction of her spirit. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and the terrifying possibility of being valued for who she was rather than what she could provide. "I choose to stay," she said, her voice steady and clear. Garrett's face darkened with rage. "This isn't over, Blackwood. The girl belongs to us by right, and we will return to claim her." "Then you'll return to die." Kieran's words were matter of fact, spoken like a man discussing the weather. "Because I protect what's mine, and I don't give second chances to those who threaten my family." The Millbrook wolves filed out in furious silence, their postures stiff with wounded pride and impotent rage. But at the doorway, Garrett turned back with a smile that made Lyra's blood run cold. "Enjoy your monster, girl. Let's see how long you last when he shows you his true nature." When they were gone, Kieran turned to her with an expression of fierce protectiveness. "You're safe now. They can't take you anywhere you don't want to go." "What if they come back with more wolves? What if they bring the council?" "Then they'll learn why I'm called the Monster of the North." His hand found her cheek, gentle despite the violence that had been radiating from him moments before. "I meant what I said, Lyra. You're part of my pack now, my family. I won't let anyone hurt you." She leaned into his touch, feeling the golden warmth of connection that flowed between them like a river. "And I meant what I said too. I choose to stay. Even knowing what I am, what I might do. Especially knowing what you are." She covered his hand with hers, holding his palm against her face. "You're not a monster, Kieran. You're a king who forgot how to trust himself." Something shifted in his golden eyes, something like hope struggling to be born. "Then help me remember." 3 days passed in careful tension, with Kieran maintaining his protective distance, while Lyra settled into the rhythm of life in the fortress. She spent her mornings in the library, learning to read the ancient texts with Moira's patient guidance. Her afternoons were devoted to helping with the daily tasks that kept the stronghold running, tending the gardens, preparing meals, mending clothes for the other refugees who had found sanctuary in Kieran's domain. But it was the evenings that tested her resolve. Every night after dinner, Kieran would disappear to his tower, and she would lie awake listening to the sound of his restless pacing overhead. The mate bond that had blazed between them in the courtyard hummed constantly now, a golden thread of connection that grew stronger with each passing hour. On the fourth evening, everything changed. Kieran had been sparring in the training yard again, working out his frustrations on practice dummies and stone targets. When he came inside, his shirt torn and bloodied from where he'd pushed himself too hard, Lyra was waiting for him in his study with water and clean bandages. "You're hurt," she said, setting down the basin on his desk. "It's nothing." But he didn't protest when she moved closer, her gentle hands examining the claw marks that scored his shoulder. "These are deep. You could have killed yourself training like this." She dipped a cloth in the warm water and began cleaning the wounds with careful precision. "Why do you punish yourself like this?" Kieran went very still under her touch. "Because it's better than the alternative." "What alternative?" His golden eyes met hers in the flickering candlelight. "Touching you, taking what I want, letting my wolf claim what it recognizes as ours." The admission hung between them like a live wire, dangerous and electric. Lyra's hands paused in their ministrations, her pulse quickening at the raw need in his voice. "Would that be so terrible?" she whispered. "You don't know what you're asking." His breathing was becoming laboured, his control visibly fraying as her fingers traced the edges of his wounds. "My wolf has been caged for 200 years. When the bond completes, when the claiming begins, there will be nothing gentle about it." "I'm not asking for gentle." The words came out braver than she felt. "I'm asking for real, for honest, for whatever this is between us to stop being something we're afraid of." Kieran's hands came up to cover hers, stilling their movement against his skin. "Lyra, I know what happened to Mira. I know you're terrified of hurting me the way you hurt her." She leaned closer, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. "But I'm not her, and this isn't then. Maybe it's time you stopped punishing yourself for something that wasn't your fault." "It was my fault." The words came out broken, filled with 2 centuries of guilt and self-recrimination. "I felt her heart stop. I felt the life leave her body while my wolf was still claiming her. I killed the person I loved most in this world." "You loved her?" "I thought I did, but what I feel for you—" He shook his head, his golden eyes blazing in the candlelight. "What I feel for you makes what I felt for her look like a pale shadow, and that terrifies me more than any enemy I've ever faced." The confession shattered the last of Lyra's restraint. She rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his, pouring all of her own desperate need into the kiss. For a moment, Kieran went rigid with shock. Then his control snapped completely. His arms came around her like iron bands, lifting her off her feet as he kissed her back with 2 centuries of suppressed hunger. She could feel his wolf surging beneath his skin, could taste the wildness on his tongue as his human facade began to crumble. The mate bond between them exploded into brilliant gold and silver light, washing over them in waves of connection so intense it was almost painful. Lyra gasped against his mouth as the sensation overwhelmed her, every nerve ending suddenly alive with the awareness of him. This was what the stories meant when they spoke of mate bonds, this consuming fire that made everything else fade to insignificance, this desperate need that went deeper than desire and beyond reason. Kieran carried her to the great chair by the fireplace, settling her across his lap without breaking their kiss. His hands tangled in her hair, holding her to him as if she might disappear if he let go. She could feel his body changing beneath her, growing larger and more powerful as his wolf fought for dominance. "Yes," she whispered against his lips when he tried to pull back. "Don't stop. Don't you dare stop." But even as the words left her mouth, she could see the moment the memories hit him. His eyes flew wide with horror, and suddenly she was flying through the air as he threw her away from him with enough force to send her stumbling across the room. "Get out!" The words came out as a roar, his voice distorting as his wolf surged toward the surface. "Get away from me!" Lyra hit the stone wall hard enough to drive the breath from her lungs. When she looked up, Kieran was backing away from her with his hands pressed to his head, his body partially shifted in a way that looked agonizing. "Kieran, please!" "I said get out!" His form rippled and changed, muscles expanding and bones lengthening as his control shattered completely. "I won't kill you too. I won't." The pain in his voice broke her heart, but the mate bond between them was screaming in protest at the sudden separation. Every instinct she possessed was telling her to go to him, to comfort him, to complete what they had started. Instead, she found herself pressed against the wall, tears streaming down her face as she watched the man she was falling in love with tear himself apart, rather than risk hurting her. "I'm not her!" she cried out, her voice breaking with emotion. "I'm not Mira! Why won't you see that?" "Because I can't bury another mate!" The words came out as a howl of anguish. "Because losing you would destroy whatever humanity I have left." He fled then, his partially shifted form moving with inhuman speed toward the door. But he stopped on the threshold, his shoulders shaking with the effort of maintaining even this much control. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice barely recognizable. "I'm so sorry, Lyra. You deserve better than a monster who can't touch you without risking your life." Then he was gone, leaving her alone in the study with the lingering scent of his desperation and the echo of a mate bond that had been severed just as it reached completion. Lyra slid down the wall to sit on the cold stone floor, wrapping her arms around her knees as she tried to process what had just happened. The rejection hurt worse than anything she had ever experienced, a physical ache that went soul deep and left her feeling hollow and broken. But underneath the pain was something else. Anger, fierce, burning anger at a man who was so convinced of his own monstrosity that he would deny them both the connection they desperately needed. She had told him she wasn't fragile, had shown him that she could handle his power, his wildness, his desperate need, and he had thrown her away anyway, choosing 200-year-old guilt over present reality. From somewhere high above she could hear howling, long, mournful cries that spoke of a pain too deep for human expression. Kieran was in his tower again, transformed and pacing and hating himself for wanting what he was convinced he couldn't have. But this time Lyra didn't listen with sympathy. This time she listened with the growing determination of a woman who was tired of being treated like she was made of glass by a man who was too afraid of his own power to see her strength. If Kieran wanted to be a coward, that was his choice, but she was done being the victim of his fear. 2 days of silence stretched between them like an open wound. Kieran had barricaded himself in his tower, and Lyra threw herself into learning everything she could about the fortress and its people. She helped Moira in the kitchens, worked alongside the gardeners, and spent long hours in the library studying texts about bloodlines and ancient magic. She was searching for answers, searching for some way to prove to herself and to him that she was strong enough to survive whatever claiming ritual had killed his first mate. The truth came looking for her instead. On the third morning, she woke to find the great hall filled with voices and the sound of boots on stone. Through the tall windows she could see another group of riders in the courtyard, but these weren't from her old pack. The banners they flew were unfamiliar, and there were more of them than before. Moira found her as she dressed, the older woman's face grim with worry. "They came at dawn," she said without preamble. 3 packs this time. Millbrook brought friends." "What do they want?" "The same thing they wanted before. You. But this time they brought a truth stone and formal accusations." Moira's hands were shaking as she helped Lyra lace her dress. "They're demanding a trial by ancient law. If you're proven guilty of theft, they can claim you as compensation." Lyra's blood turned to ice. "Where's Kieran?" "Still in his tower. He's been there since—" Moira didn't finish the sentence, but they both knew what she meant. Since he'd thrown Lyra away rather than risk completing their bond. "He doesn't know they're here." "Oh, he knows. His wolves told him the moment they crossed the boundary stones, but he won't come down, won't even shift to human form to speak with his own people." Moira's voice was thick with frustration. "He's so consumed with guilt over what happened between you two that he's paralyzed." Lyra felt anger flare in her chest. Even now, when she needed him most, Kieran was hiding from his responsibilities because he couldn't bear to face what he'd done. "Then I'll handle this myself." "Child, you can't face 3 packs alone." "I won't be alone. You said Kieran has wolves, people who consider this place their pack. They'll stand with me." Lyra squared her shoulders, drawing on every scrap of courage she possessed. And maybe it's time everyone learned the truth about what really happened in Millbrook. The Great Hall had been transformed into a makeshift court, with representatives from 3 different packs seated in judgment. Alpha Garrett sat in the centre, flanked by 2 other alphas Lyra didn't recognise. Marcus stood behind his father with a smug smile that made her stomach turn, but it was the 4th figure that made her breath catch in her throat. Vivian. Alpha Garrett's daughter stood near the truth stone, with her golden hair perfectly arranged, and her blue eyes bright with malicious satisfaction. She was everything Lyra was not: beautiful, powerful, beloved by her pack. And she was the reason Lyra's life had been destroyed. "Ah, there she is!" Garrett's voice carried across the hall as Lyra entered. "The thief who thinks she can hide behind the monster of the north." "I'm not hiding from anything." Lyra walked to the centre of the hall, acutely aware that she was alone. No Kieran at her back, no massive presence to shield her from their judgment. "You want a trial? Then let's have one." "Where is your protector?" one of the other alphas asked. Surely the great Kieran Blackwood wouldn't abandon his claimed mate to face justice alone. "I'm not his claimed mate." The words tasted like ash in her mouth. "And I don't need protection to prove my innocence." Vivian stepped forward with a laugh, like breaking glass. "Innocence? The stolen jewellery was found in your belongings. The evidence is irrefutable." "The evidence was planted." "By whom? Who else had access to your quarters? Who else would benefit from framing a worthless servant?" Vivian's smile was razor-sharp with false innocence. "Really, Lyra, these desperate accusations are beneath even you." The truthstone sat on the table between them, a crystal the size of a man's fist that pulsed with inner light. Ancient magic, older than the packs, older than the feuds that divided them. It would show the truth of what had happened, but only if the right questions were asked. "Place your hand on the stone," Garrett commanded. "Swear that you did not steal from my pack." Lyra approached the stone without hesitation, her palms settling on its cool surface. The moment she touched it, the crystal blazed with brilliant white light. "I did not steal anything from the Millbrook pack," she said clearly. The light remained steady and pure. "Truth." Garrett's expression darkened. "Then how do you explain the jewellery found in your possession?" "Someone else put it there." Again, the light remained true. Murmurs began to ripple through the assembled witnesses. "Lies!" Vivian snapped, but her voice carried a note of panic. "She's somehow corrupting the stone's magic." "The truth stone cannot be corrupted," one of the other alphas interrupted. "If she says someone else planted the evidence, then someone did." "But who?" Garrett's eyes swept the room, looking for someone to blame. "Who else would have access?" "I would." The voice came from the back of the hall, and every head turned to see a young woman stepping forward. Lyra recognised her as one of the servants from her old pack, a girl named Elena who had always been kind to her. "I saw what really happened," Elena continued, her voice shaking but determined. "I saw Vivian enter Lyra's quarters while she was working in the kitchens. I saw her plant the stolen items under the mattress." "That's a lie," Vivian snarled, but her face had gone pale. "Is it?" Garrett's voice was deadly quiet. "Elena, place your hand on the stone." The servant girl moved forward with visible reluctance, her palm settling on the crystal surface. The moment she touched it, the stone erupted in silver light so brilliant it filled the entire hall. But that wasn't the only thing that happened. The light seemed to recognise something in Elena, something that resonated with the ancient magic. The girl gasped and stumbled backward, but not before every person in the room saw her eyes flash with the same silver radiance. "Silver moon bloodline," one of the alphas breathed. "She carries silver moon blood." Lyra stared at Elena in shock. The silver moon line was supposed to be extinct, hunted to death centuries ago because their power threatened other packs. But here was proof that at least some had survived, hidden among common servants where no one would think to look. And if Eleanor carried that bloodline— "Your turn," Garrett said to his daughter, his voice like winter ice. "Place your hand on the stone and swear you didn't plant that jewelry." Vivian backed away from the crystal, her beautiful face twisted with fear and rage. "I don't have to prove anything to you. I'm your daughter, your heir." "You're my daughter who may have committed a crime that brought 3 packs to our doorstep." Garrett's alpha power pressed down on her like a physical weight. "Touch the stone, Vivian. Tell us the truth." For a moment, Lyra thought the other woman might refuse entirely. Then Vivian's pride won over her fear, and she stalked to the table with her head held high. The moment her palm touched the truth stone, the crystal went completely black. The silence that followed was deafening. Black light meant more than lies. It meant corruption, deliberate deception, the kind of malicious intent that went against every law of pack justice. "I planted the jewelry!" Vivian snarled, her mask of innocence finally slipping completely. "I wanted the pathetic little servant gone, so I framed her for theft, and it worked, didn't it? She fled like the coward she is." "Why?" Garrett's voice was barely human. "Why would you destroy an innocent girl's life?" "Because she was competition." The words exploded out of Vivian with 2 years of suppressed jealousy and rage. "Because Marcus was obsessed with her, because the pack members liked her better than me, because she had something I could never have." "What could a servant possibly have that you wanted?" Vivian's laugh was broken and bitter. Power, real power, not the shallow authority that comes from being an alpha's daughter. I could smell it on her, could see it in the way animals responded to her. She was hiding something, suppressing something, and I couldn't stand that someone so beneath me might actually be more than I was. The truth stone pulsed with steady black light, confirming every poisonous word. But then something extraordinary happened. The stone began to change, the black light shifting to silver as it responded to something else in the room. Something that was reacting to Vivian's confession. That something was Lyra. She felt it building inside her like a dam about to burst, power that had been locked away so long she'd forgotten it existed. The silver light from the stone called to something in her blood, something that recognized the ancient magic and responded in kind. Her wolf, silent for so many years, finally lifted her head and howled. The sound that came from Lyra's throat was unlike anything that had ever been heard in the great hall. It was pure silver light given voice, the cry of a bloodline that refused to stay hidden any longer. When the howl faded, Lyra's eyes blazed with the same silver fire that had marked Elena, and everyone in the room understood what they were witnessing. The silver moon bloodline hadn't died out completely. It had been hiding in plain sight, suppressed and forgotten, in a servant girl that everyone had dismissed as nobody special. And now it was awake. The silence that followed Lyra's silver howl stretched like a bowstring about to snap. Every wolf in the great hall had gone perfectly still, their instincts warring between the urge to submit to royal blood and the shock of discovering that bloodline in someone they had dismissed as powerless. The Truthstone continued to pulse with silver light, resonating with the power that was finally awakening in Lyra's veins. Alpha Garrett was the first to find his voice. "Silver moon! By the ancient laws, by the old magic!" He dropped to one knee, his head bowed in recognition of something greater than pack politics. "We acknowledge the lost bloodline." One by one, the other alphas followed suit. Even Marcus, his face pale with dawning understanding, sank to his knees beside his father. Only Vivian remained standing, her beautiful features twisted with rage and disbelief. "No!" she snarled, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "This is impossible. She's nobody. She's nothing. I won't bow to a pathetic servant girl just because some old rock glows silver." "You will show respect," Garrett's voice cracked like a whip. "The Silver Moon line ruled before our ancestors learned to shift. They are royalty by blood and magic, not politics." "I don't care what her blood says. Look at her." Vivian gestured dismissively at Lyra, who stood frozen in the centre of the hall, still reeling from her own transformation. "Does she look like royalty to you? Does she act like it? She's weak, she's broken, she's—" "Magnificent." The word came from the great doorway, spoken in a voice that made the stone walls tremble. Every head in the hall turned to see Kieran, standing in the entrance, no longer the broken man who had fled from intimacy. This was the Alpha King in his full power, his golden eyes blazing as they fixed on Lyra with unmistakable reverence. He moved through the assembled wolves like a force of nature, his presence so overwhelming that even the visiting alphas shrank back instinctively. But his attention was completely focused on Lyra, on the silver light that still flickered in her eyes, and the way she held herself like someone discovering her own strength for the first time. "Your Majesty," he said, dropping to one knee before her with a grace that spoke of old-world courtesy. "Forgive me for not recognizing you sooner." "Kieran, don't." Lyra's voice was shaky, overwhelmed by the sudden shift in everyone's treatment of her. "I'm still just me. I'm still—" "You were never just anything." He rose to his full height, towering over her, but somehow managing to make the gesture feel protective rather than intimidating. "You are Silver Moon royalty, the heir to a bloodline that was thought lost forever. Every wolf in this room owes you their respect." "Even you?" Something soft and vulnerable flickered in his golden eyes. "Especially me. I should have seen it from the beginning. Should have understood why my wolf recognized you, why the mate bond struck so powerfully between us." His voice dropped to something only she could hear. "You were born to match me, weren't you? Born strong enough to survive what lesser wolves cannot." Before Lyra could respond, Vivian's voice cut through the moment like a blade. "This is ridiculous. Ancient bloodlines, royal heritage, it's all superstition and propaganda. She's still the same weak girl who let me frame her for theft." Vivian stepped forward, her chin raised in defiance. Silver Moon or not, she's proven she's a coward who runs from confrontation. "Is that what you think?" Lyra turned to face her tormentor, and something had changed in her posture. The frightened servant girl was gone, replaced by someone who carried herself with unconscious authority. "You think framing me proves your superiority? I think destroying your pathetic life was easier than swatting a fly. Then you understand nothing about power." Lyra's voice carried a resonance it had never held before, something that made the other wolves in the hall take notice. "Real power isn't about crushing those beneath you, Vivian. It's about protecting those who cannot protect themselves." She gestured to the assembled wolves, the refugees and outcasts who had found sanctuary in Kieran's fortress. "Look around you. Everyone in this room has been broken by people like you. Dismissed, discarded, declared worthless by those who measure value only in strength and status." "Your point?" Vivian sneered. "My point is that you're surrounded by wolves whose loyalty you can never buy, whose respect you can never command, whose strength you can never break." Lyra's eyes blazed with silver fire. "Because they chose to be here. They chose to follow a king who values them for who they are, not what they can provide." She turned to address the room, her voice carrying to every corner. "I may be Silver Moon royalty by blood, but I'm one of you by choice. I know what it's like to be considered worthless. I know what it's like to have your value measured only by how useful you are to those in power." Elena, the servant girl who had revealed Vivian's deception, stepped forward with tears in her eyes. "You never made me feel worthless. Even when you had nothing, you shared your food with those who had less." "You helped me tend my sick daughter," another voice called out from the crowd, "asked for nothing in return. You stood up for the youngest refugees when the older ones picked on them," said a third, "even though it meant less food for yourself." One by one, the stories came forth. Acts of kindness and courage that Lyra had forgotten, moments when she had chosen compassion over self-preservation despite having nothing to give. The picture they painted was of someone who had always been royal in everything but recognition, someone whose true power lay not in bloodline magic, but in an unbreakable spirit that lifted others, even as the world tried to crush her. Vivian's face grew paler with each testimony, her confident cruelty crumbling as she realised that she was outnumbered, not just in bodies, but in hearts and minds. "This doesn't change anything," she said desperately. Pack law recognises the authority of royal bloodlines," Kieran interrupted, his voice cutting through her protests like a sword. "And Silver Moon royalty outranks every alpha in this room." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that you committed crimes against a member of the royal family. You framed her for theft, destroyed her reputation, and forced her into exile." His golden eyes were merciless as they fixed on Vivian. "By ancient law, that makes you guilty of treason." The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Treason against royalty was punishable by exile or death, depending on the severity of the offence. "She wasn't royal when I framed her," Vivian said frantically. "Her bloodline was hidden, suppressed." "Her bloodline was always there," Moira spoke up from the edge of the crowd, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had lived long enough to see the rise and fall of kingdoms. Silver Moon magic doesn't appear from nothing. It awakens when the bearer is ready to claim it. "And when did you become ready?" Kieran asked gently, turning back to Lyra with something like wonder in his expression. Lyra thought about the question, tracing back through the events that had brought her to this moment. "When I realised I was tired of being afraid, when I decided I'd rather die free than live as someone else's property." She met his gaze steadily. "When I chose to trust you despite every reason to run." "The mate bond," he breathed. "It wasn't just recognition, it was awakening. My wolf called to your royal blood, and your magic answered. Is that what this is?" Lyra looked down at her hands, which were still flickering with traces of silver light. "Magic?" "Command magic, the ability to influence other wolves, to inspire loyalty, to lead through strength of spirit rather than force." Kieran's voice held a note of awe. "It's what made the Silver Moon line such effective rulers. They didn't dominate their people, they earned their devotion." Lyra felt the truth of his words settling into her bones like recognition of something she had always known but never understood. This power that was awakening in her, it wasn't alien or frightening. It was simply her, finally free to be what she had always been meant to become. She turned back to the assembled alphas, who were still kneeling in recognition of her bloodline. "Rise," she commanded, and the word carried enough authority to bring them to their feet without hesitation. "Vivian Garrett, by your own confession and the testimony of witnesses, you are guilty of framing an innocent person and destroying a life through deliberate deception." "You can't!" "I can, and I will." Lyra's voice was steady, certain. "But I won't demand your death or your exile. Instead, I offer you a choice." Vivian's eyes narrowed with suspicion. What kind of choice? "Spend 1 year as a servant in this fortress. Learn what it means to be powerless, to have your value questioned, to work for the benefit of others without recognition or reward." Lyra's silver gaze never wavered. "If you can show true remorse for what you've done, if you can learn to value others as more than tools for your ambition, then you'll be free to return to your pack with honour. And if I refuse, then you face the traditional punishment for treason against royal blood." Kieran's voice was silk over steel. "Permanent exile from all pack territories, with orders to kill on sight if you ever return." Vivian looked around the room, seeing nothing but hostile faces and closed hearts. She had burned every bridge, alienated every potential ally, and now faced a choice between humility and death. "I accept your terms," she said through gritted teeth. "Then let your education begin." Lyra turned to Moira with a small smile. "I believe you mentioned needing help in the kitchens." The older woman's answering grin was sharp with satisfaction. "Indeed I did, Your Majesty, indeed I did." As the crowd began to disperse and the visiting alphas prepared for their journey home, Kieran moved to Lyra's side with something like reverence in his expression. "How does it feel," he asked quietly, "to finally know who you really are?" Lyra considered the question, feeling the silver power humming gently in her veins. "Like coming home to myself," she said finally. "Like I've been wearing clothes that didn't fit, and now I finally have something made for my true size." "And us?" The question came out vulnerable, uncertain. "Does this change anything between us?" She turned to face him fully, seeing past the Alpha King to the man beneath, the man who had saved her, sheltered her, fought his own demons to keep her safe. "Only if you want it to," she said softly. "I may be royal blood now, but I'm still the woman who chose you over safety. Still the one who sees a protector where the world sees a monster." Relief flooded his golden eyes. "Then nothing has changed. You're still mine, and I'm still yours." "Are you? Because I remember you throwing me across a room rather than risk completing our bond." Pain flickered across his features. "That was before I understood what you truly were, before I realized you were born to match my strength, not break beneath it. And now? Now I think it's time I stopped being a coward and claimed what's mine." The promise in his voice sent heat racing through her veins, the mate bond between them singing with renewed possibility. But before either of them could act on that promise, they had a kingdom to build and a future to secure. The silver moon had risen again, and the north would never be the same. The war came at dawn 7 days later, arriving like a storm of steel and fury across the mountain passes. Lyra woke to the sound of horns echoing through the valleys, the deep bronze calls that meant enemies approached in numbers too large to ignore. She dressed quickly and made her way to the battlements, where she found Kieran already waiting with his war council spread before him like pieces on a game board. "How many?" she asked, moving to stand beside him as she gazed out at the army assembling in the valley below. 5 packs, maybe 6. His voice was grim as he pointed to the various banners fluttering in the morning breeze. "They've been gathering for weeks, building an alliance based on fear of what you represent." Lyra studied the enemy forces with growing dread. There had to be nearly 300 wolves down there, armed and organised and united by a single terrifying purpose. From this distance she could make out siege engines, supply wagons, and the kind of methodical preparation that spoke of a campaign rather than a raid. "They want to kill me. They want to eliminate the Silver Moon bloodline before it can grow strong enough to challenge them." Kieran's jaw was tight with controlled fury. "Dead royalty can't inspire rebellions or unite the outcasts against established power. And if they can't kill me, then they'll try to claim you, force a mating bond with one of their alphas to control your bloodline and legitimize their rule." His golden eyes blazed with protective rage. "Neither option is acceptable." Moira climbed the stairs to the battlements, her face pale but determined. "The defences are ready, my lord. Every refugee who can hold a weapon has been armed, and the families with children are secured in the inner keep." "How many do we have?" Lyra asked. 43 capable fighters, including yourself and the Alpha." Moira's voice was steady despite the impossible odds. "Not counting the elderly and wounded who insist on contributing however they can. 43 against 300. The mathematics were brutal and unforgiving." "I should surrender," Lyra said quietly. "If they want me, I should go to them. I won't let all of you die because—" "No." Kieran's voice cracked like a whip, his alpha authority pressing down on her with unmistakable command. "You are not a sacrifice to be offered up for the comfort of cowards. You are Silver Moon royalty, and this is your territory as much as mine." "But the people chose to be here. They chose to follow us, to build something better than what they left behind." He turned to face her fully, his hands coming up to frame her face, with infinite gentleness, despite the violence crackling in the air around them. We don't survive by surrendering to bullies, we survive by showing them that some things are worth fighting for. Before Lyra could argue further, shouts from the courtyard below drew their attention. The enemy army was on the move, their formations shifting with military precision as they began their assault on the fortress walls. "It begins," Kieran said grimly. "Stay close to me. Whatever happens, don't let them separate us." The first wave hit the outer defences like a battering ram made of claws and fury. Kieran shifted the moment the enemy wolves breached the courtyard, his massive dire wolf form appearing in a cascade of silver light and raw power. But this time, Lyra didn't shrink back or worry about his control. This time, she shifted with him. Her transformation was nothing like the painful, awkward shifts she remembered from her youth. This was fluid and powerful, her silver wolf emerging with the grace of something born to rule. She was smaller than Kieran's massive dire wolf, but she carried herself with an authority that made even the enemy wolves hesitate. They fought side by side like they had been born for it, their wolves moving in perfect synchronization as they tore through the enemy ranks. Kieran's brute strength complemented Lyra's tactical brilliance, her silver power reaching out to turn enemy wolves against their own packmates mid-battle. But there were so many of them. For every enemy they brought down, 2 more seemed to take its place. The defenders were being pushed back steadily, their small numbers overwhelmed by the sheer mass of attacking wolves. The inner courtyard, Kieran's voice reached her through the pack bond, rough with exhaustion. "We need to fall back before they surround us completely." Lyra acknowledged the retreat with a flash of silver acknowledgement, but as they began pulling their people back toward the keep, she saw something that made her blood run cold. A group of enemy alphas had broken through the eastern wall and were heading directly for the refugee quarters where the non-combatants were sheltering. Children and elderly wounded wolves who couldn't fight, all the people they had sworn to protect. "The refugees!" she called out to Kieran, but he was already engaged with 3 enemy alphas who had surrounded him like a pack of hunting dogs. There was no time to wait for help, no time to plan or strategize or find a safer way. Lyra threw herself toward the eastern breach, her silver wolf form blazing with power as she intercepted the enemy alphas before they could reach the innocent. But there were too many of them. 5 full-grown male alphas in their prime, all focused on eliminating the Silver Moon threat. The first one hit her like a freight train, his massive jaws clamping down on her shoulder with enough force to crack bone. Pain exploded through her system, but she twisted in his grip and raked her claws across his throat, sending him stumbling backward with blood streaming down his fur. The second and third attacked together, trying to bring her down through coordinated strikes. She rolled beneath their assault and came up with her teeth buried in the second one's leg, her silver power flaring outward to confuse and disorient them. But the 4th alpha circled behind her while she was distracted, his claws raking down her spine with brutal efficiency. Lyra screamed, a sound that was part wolf howl, part human anguish, and felt her strength beginning to fail. That was when something extraordinary happened. Her power, pushed to its absolute limit by desperation and pain, exploded outward in a shockwave of pure silver light. Every enemy wolf within 100 yards was caught in the blast, their minds suddenly flooded with an irresistible compulsion to submit to royal authority. They stopped mid-attack, all of them, 300 enemy wolves, frozen in place as Lyra's command magic washed over them like a tide. "Kneel." The word came from her throat with the force of absolute authority, carrying the weight of bloodline magic that had been suppressed for too long. It echoed across the battlefield like thunder, reaching into the mind of every wolf present and demanding obedience. They knelt, all of them, enemy alphas who had never bowed to anyone, warriors who had spent their lives conquering others, soldiers who followed orders only when it suited them. They all dropped to the ground in perfect synchronization, their wolves recognizing something more powerful than politics or pack loyalty. The silence that followed was absolute and profound. Lyra stood in the centre of the courtyard, her silver wolf form blazing like a star, blood streaming from her wounds, but her power radiating outward in waves that made the very stones of the fortress seem to hum with recognition. This was what Silver Moon royalty had been capable of in the old days, not domination through force, but command through absolute authority. Kieran reached her first, his dire wolf form moving with careful reverence as he approached. His golden eyes were wide with something that looked like worship as he took in the sight of her standing victorious over an army. "End this," he said through their bond, his mental voice rough with awe and fierce pride. "Show them mercy or justice, but end it as their queen." Lyra looked out at the sea of kneeling wolves, feeling the weight of decision settle on her shoulders like a crown. She could kill them all with a word, could turn their own wolves against them and eliminate every threat to her people's safety. Instead, she chose mercy with teeth. "You came here to kill me because you feared what I represent," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the battlefield. "You were right to fear me, but not because I want to conquer or control you." She began walking through the kneeling army, her silver power keeping them frozen in place as she passed judgment. "You should fear me because I represent something you've forgotten, something you've spent so long suppressing that you no longer recognize it when you see it." She stopped in the centre of the enemy formation, her words reaching every ear. "I represent the idea that power should protect the weak, not prey on them. That strength should be used to build up rather than tear down." Her gaze swept over the assembled alphas, each one held captive by magic they couldn't resist. "I could kill you all. I could turn your own wolves against you and watch you destroy each other for sport. But that would make me no better than what you are, bullies who use power to hurt those weaker than themselves. Instead, I offer you the same choice I gave Vivian Garrett. Learn what it means to serve rather than be served. Spend 1 year working to rebuild what your fear has torn down. Help the refugees you've displaced, tend the wounded you've created, and maybe you'll remember what it means to be worthy of the power you wield." "And if we refuse?" one of the enemy alphas managed to ask through gritted teeth. "Then you leave this place and never return. But know that if you ever again raise your hand against the innocent, against the outcast, against anyone who seeks shelter from those who would abuse them—" Her silver eyes blazed with promise. "I will find you, and next time I won't be merciful." She released her hold on them slowly, watching as 300 enemy wolves climbed shakily to their feet. Most of them looked at her with expressions of dawning understanding, as if seeing something clearly for the first time. They began to disperse, some choosing immediate exile, others approaching hesitantly to offer their service. The great army that had come to destroy the Silver Moon had been transformed into something else entirely, a force for rebuilding rather than destruction. When the battlefield finally cleared, Lyra collapsed into Kieran's arms, her strength finally giving out after the enormous expenditure of power. But she was smiling as darkness claimed her, because for the first time in her life she had been exactly who she was meant to be. She had been a queen.